Coming up next, Sitting at 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Susan Kelly, President-elect of the City Club. Welcome to another outstanding and particularly timely City Club Friday Forum. I'm going to start with a message that usually comes at the end of our announcements today. I want to remind you that the privilege to ask a question of our speakers when they have finished belongs to City Club members only. Guests are welcome to be here. We're glad you're here. And if you'd like to ask a question, please join the City Club. And that question needs to be 30 seconds at max, not a statement, not your philosophy. Thank you. The subject today, is national security and civil liberties in light of our current national situation. Our guest speakers are Jim Huffman, Dean of the Lewis and Clark Law School, and District Attorney for Multnomah County, Mike Schrunk. On next Friday, the 19th, we will have another program related to our New World Awareness. The title is Understanding Our Neighbors, Religious Pluralism in America. Our speaker will be Dr. Diana Eck, Professor of Comparative Religion, author and founder of the Pluralism Project at Harvard University, and coincidentally, Bozeman, Montana native, and in the same class with our speaker Jim today. It's a small world. All of you have received a pledge card and a letter from City Club asking you to participate generously in this year's annual fund campaign. Our goal is $95,000. Just as we have united to support our nation and the victims of our recent tragedy, we must also remain united in support of nonprofit organizations like City Club, an organization that has grown leaders and helped to inspire the growth of outstanding citizens in our community for over 85 years. Thanks to the generosity of our corporate friends and lead gifts from our Board of Governors and annual fund team members, we have already surpassed $58,000. So please help us surpass our goal. For those of you who may not be aware, the City Club website offers access to research reports, past club program presentations, upcoming events, and membership information. Please check us out at www.pdxcityclub.org. Our member host today is Brad Avakian, a member of the program committee and attorney in private practice. He will ask the first question of our speakers. Following Brad's question, we will open the program to questions from City Club members in the audience. Please line up behind the microphone before Brad is finished so that we have as much time as possible for the questions. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from the following: Legacy Health Systems, Pope and Talbot, Washington Mutual Savings. We are grateful for their support. Our speakers today, Michael Schrunk has been the elected district attorney for Multnomah County since 1981. He supervises a staff of 225, and they review over 30,000 cases annually, approximately 10,000 felonies and 15,000 misdemeanors. Mike is a graduate of the University of Oregon Law School. He served as a captain in the U.S. Marine Corps in Vietnam and is past president of the Multnomah County Bar Association. His list of community and legal service is extensive. He has been a leader on the Community Court Project, the Drug Court, and the Neighborhood District Attorney Program. Mike currently chairs the Regional Organized Crime Narcotics Task Force and is a member of the county's Public Safety Coordinating Council. He is the recipient of several national awards, including the U.S. Department of Justice's Public Service Award for Community Leadership. Jim Huffman is the Dean and Professor of Law at Lewis and Clark College. His teaching areas are constitutional law, natural resources, and constitutional history. He is a graduate of Montana State University, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and the University of Chicago Law School. Jim is the co-founder and served as director of the Natural Resources Law Institute. He has taught in national and international settings in Florida, Greece, and Guatemala on Fulbright grants and as a fellow of the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. Jim is chair of the Oregon Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and was a member of the Oregon Law Institute's planning committees for both its water law program and its jurisprudence program. Welcome to our speakers today.
Thank you, Susan. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here with the City Club and to be here with Mike Schrunk, who's not only done wonderful things for our community, but he also employs a lot of my graduates, and I'm very grateful for that. While no living American had experienced anything like the terrorist attacks on September 11, the resultant tension between national security and civil liberties that we're here to talk about today is not new to Americans. We have regrettably been down this path before, and our track record is far from perfect. As former Oregonian and recently named president of Columbia University, Lee Bollinger, told the New York Times earlier this week, quote, "The history lesson of the last 82 years is that each time our country felt this vulnerability, it has substantially restricted free speech. And so, I would add, it has been with other constitutional liberties." Of course, the most frequently cited case is the internment of 70,000 American citizens and 50,000 resident aliens during the Roosevelt administration after Pearl Harbor. But virtually every serious threat to our national security has led us, in one way or another, to compromise liberties. Very early in our history, Congress enacted the Alien and Sedition Acts, pursuant to which, in the words of Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black, quote, "Publishers were sent to jail for writing their own views and for publishing the views of others. The slightest criticism of government or policies of government officials was enough to cause biased federal prosecutors to put the machinery of government to work to crush and imprison the critic." There's no small irony in the fact that those acts, the Alien Sedition Acts, were modeled on and inspired by similar legislation that existed in England, of course, the country from which we had declared our independence in the name of our freedoms. During the Civil War, our government suspended the writ of habeas corpus and imposed other limits on freedom in the interest of preserving the Union. During World War I, our Supreme Court was faced with many constitutional challenges in the name of the preservation of the state. And again, during World War II, and the Korean War, and the Cold War, and the Vietnam War, we had similar challenges and similar violations. As sure as it rains in Oregon, in times of crisis, our government comes seeking expanded powers to pursue its mission of national security. And so it has done in the wake of September 11. In all of these instances, the justification for limiting freedom has been the protection of freedom. This is the conundrum of every freedom-loving people. We cannot have freedom without the state to guarantee it, but there has been no greater abuse of freedom than those undertaken in the name of the state. Millions of people around the globe, including presently and notably people of Afghanistan, suffer grotesque repression in the name of some higher good which the state purports to represent. Tens of millions of people lost their most basic freedom, their lives, during the 20th century. Yet the 20th century also saw a blossoming of freedom around the world, thanks in large part to the United States and the model that it has set for other countries. It might and will be suggested that freedom is a relative matter, that we in the United States have freedoms unimagined by most people on earth, that we can give up just a little freedom in the name of national security. But American liberty can suffer death by 1,000 cuts just as surely as 5,000 people lost their lives in an instant in the World Trade Center collapse. Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter's cautionary words after in the opinion in the 1952 steel seizure case bear repeating. In the context of a dispute between the President and the Congress, Frankfurter wrote, quote, "The framers rested the structure of our central government on the system of checks and balances. Not so long ago, it was fashionable to find that system obstructive to effective government. It was easy to ridicule that system as outmoded. Too easy. The experience for which the world has passed in our own day has made vivid the realization that the framers were not inexperienced doctrinaires. These long-headed statesmen had no illusion that our people enjoyed biological or psychological or sociological immunities from the hazards of concentrated power." Well, like the framers, Frankfurter's concern was not for the relative powers of Congress and the President, but for the liberties at risk when the delicate constitutional balance is lost. The same devotion to liberty must guide us in responding to our current national crisis. As I was thinking about and writing these remarks in my study at home, my eyes were attracted many times to the American flag, which is hanging above the front door of our house. And it's been there the last few weeks, but it wasn't there before that, and I suspect it won't be there sometime down the road. Like most of the flags in our city, it will return to its closet. The flag is, after all, only a symbol, a way of expressing our grief or our outrage or our commitment to our great national cause of freedom. But as our flags go back into storage, we must remain ever vigilant in the defense of freedom. Central to the defense of freedom is a respect for and commitment to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. My counsel, in a general sense, is to proceed with caution, to respect as sacred to our Constitution the liberties it protects, and understand the difference between the rules of civil society and the rules of war. Issues of civil liberties will come before our courts over the next few years in response to whatever Congress and our state governments may ultimately do in the interest of national and local security. History suggests that some of what government does will be found to be unconstitutional. But of course, there is no way to undo past limitations of freedom. It is little comfort to those whose liberties have been violated to have a court subsequently declare that a violation has occurred, unless the government respects those liberties prospectively. But absent the assistance of the people, future violations of freedom will be enacted by future Congresses and presidents in the name of national security and the protection of the state. As President Truman said of his seizure of the steel mills during the Korean War, he would do it again, notwithstanding that the Supreme Court said that it was beyond his constitutional authority. For those who have followed the history of civil liberties in this country, current proposals for expanded government power to investigate and prosecute terrorism are deja vu all over again. I suppose it was Yogi Berra who said that because he's the one who says all of these strange things. Crisis and emergency lead to expanded government intrusions on liberty, which lead to constitutional challenges, which are sometimes successful, particularly if the crisis has passed. But what sort of liberties do we really have if we have them only when it doesn't matter? The histories of nations around the globe attest to the human suffering that can result when government justifies limitations on liberty in the name of some greater national interest. But maybe I should turn to more concrete issues on the table, and I certainly will defer to Mike, who deals with these issues on a daily basis. But let me offer a few observations. The bill pending in Congress would allow government to do several things. In the area of intelligence, as I understand it, it would allow the gathering of intelligence to circumvent the standards which must be used in the collection and enforcement of criminal wiretaps, for example. Currently, if the primary purpose of the wiretap is for foreign intelligence, the standards are lower. This bill would lower those standards or broaden the scope of what constitutes national or intelligence surveillance. I'm not sure that I see this as a large problem. It depends, as in most things, in the details. Criminal investigation and intelligence surveillance, I suspect, are very, very difficult and increasingly difficult in this global age to separate. But I certainly would urge caution upon Congress in expanding that authority. The proposal for roving wiretap authority, which would permit investigators to tap any phone used by a suspect rather than a single phone, is to me nothing more than an accommodation to the era of the cell phone. It is general knowledge among cell phone users that their conversations are not secure against private snooping. Public snooping pursuant to judicially approved wiretap authority is not, in my judgment, any invasion of a reasonable expectation of privacy. We should be concerned, however, I think, about proposals for nationwide service of search and seizure orders. There can be no doubt that it is an inconvenience to law enforcement officials to have to get judicial orders on a jurisdiction-by-jurisdiction basis, but it strikes me that that inconvenience and this fairly small delay associated with it is a small price to pay for the security that we get from careful judicial review of search and seizure orders on a jurisdiction-by-jurisdiction basis. And perhaps more importantly, I would argue that that system is a reflection of our federal system, and that our federal system is a critical component to the liberties that you and I have. And I think we all too often forget about the importance of the structure of our government in protecting liberties. We tend to think of only the Bill of Rights as a protection of those liberties. Speaking of federalism, I would also suggest that we shouldn't consider it self-evident that airport security is properly a federal function. It may be, but if the perceived failures have largely to do with quality control, there may be better ways to proceed than by creating what in effect would be a new national police force. The Wall Street Journal had, I think, an interesting editorial on this subject yesterday you might be interested in. Under current law, a law enforcement officer can get an order requiring the telephone company to reveal the numbers dialed to and from a particular phone upon certification that the information sought is relevant to an ongoing criminal investigation. The bill in Congress would extend this authority to Internet communications. While there is potentially far more information to be discovered about a person through an investigation of their use of the Internet, a reasonable Internet user already understands, I would hope, that such electronic communications are not secure. In another area, that is immigration, we've learned to our dismay on September 11th that foreign attacks on America can be launched from within. While we do not yet know the immigration status of all of the perpetrators, it appears that many, if not most, were in this country legally. I assume that no one would propose to round up all of the legally resident aliens in this country on the basis of their country of origin. Surely we learned our lesson about that approach after World War II. But the risks for resident aliens and citizens of Arab ethnicity and Islamic faith for the present are nonetheless considerable if we fail to insist upon the constitutional guarantees of due process which apply to citizens and legally resident aliens alike. As the father-in-law of a Greek son-in-law living in Boston, I have personal reasons to be concerned, but my concerns are far far-reaching. Many of us are the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of immigrants. They all came as foreigners to this country, and they all came in search of freedom and opportunities. And there remain millions of people, at least tens of thousands of people, who seek to come to this country for the same reasons today. So what is the solution when there are tens of thousands of people like our ancestors who seek freedom in America and a few evildoers, to use the words of our president, who seek to destroy American freedoms? I think it is to remain welcoming, but to have high standards for entry and a system of tracking or reporting for aliens on temporary visas. A national identity card, though of doubtful utility, in my judgment, may well be a part of such a system. While several libertarians oppose this idea as an invitation to government snooping, it might help solve the problem of incompatible databases. And the reality is that virtually every American already carries all kinds of identity cards which contain and make available all kinds of personal information. And they do that voluntarily in the form of credit cards, driver's licenses, etc. We should be proud, I think, of the generous way we treat legally resident aliens in our country. We recognize that they have essentially the same rights as citizens. But we should not be hesitant to impose high standards for entry. If this means detention of some who seek entry, even for extended periods of time, when they do not meet our standards and they have no place else to go, it should not offend our sense of due process or fairness. Those who seek the enormous advantages of life in this country must be prepared to play by our rules, including the rules of entry. It is a commitment to these rules, after all, the rule of law, that makes ours the freest country in the world. Another topic is racial profiling that has been on our minds lately and on our minds for the last several years. What may be the most dastardly criminal act in American history, committed by at least 19 people of a single ethnicity, presents this issue in very stark terms. I was pleased to see David Reinhardt's column in the Oregonian last week on this subject. It has become politically correct to condemn racial profiling as an unmitigated evil, but the reality is that while profiling is a basis for easy discrimination, and it certainly is, it is and must be a tool of law enforcement. Absent knowledge of a particular suspect's identity, law enforcement officials rely on profiles of suspects every day. A suspect may be a redhead, may wear a beard, may have dark or light skin. Many innocent people will fit those descriptions, but in most investigations, that's all the police have to go on at the outset. The innocent among those profiles are protected by our commitment to due process and other constitutional liberties and our reliance on an independent judiciary. The Constitution does not protect people from inconvenience or even the embarrassment of being a suspect. Guilt by association is reprehensible, but suspicion by association is an inevitable aspect of police investigation, I believe. If we respect our constitutional protections of liberty, suspects, while inconvenienced, remain innocent until proven guilty. In the face of the events of September 11, it would be foolhardy to insist that people of every race and ethnicity be equally suspect for the crimes of that fateful day. There are also issues relating to interjurisdictional sharing of information, and I think these are difficult challenges. They relate to my comments about federalism earlier. Those jurisdictional divisions are important to the system of federalism, which assures that power doesn't get concentrated. At the same time, interjurisdictional sharing of information is important to prompt response in many kinds of investigations. But the area that concerns me the most is the First Amendment. History suggests that the freedoms of speech, assembly, and religion will be threatened by well-intentioned efforts to guard against future terrorist acts. It is here that our vigilance should be most stalwart. The tyrannies that persist around the globe depend more on restricting freedom of speech and assembly than they do on any amount of military might they may possess. The founders of the American nation understood this well, as did those from whom they sought independence. Sir William Berkeley, the governor of Virginia from 1641 to 1677, said, quote, "I thank God there are not free schools nor printing, and I hope we shall not have these for 100 years, for learning has brought disobedience and heresy and sects, not sex, into the world. And printing has divulged them and libels against the best government. God keep us from both." Well, Osama bin Laden or the Taliban could not have said it better. And this was a governor of the colony of Virginia. It is in times of high passion and fear that the protections of the First Amendment are the most important and when they are most at risk. In the words of Justice William O. Douglas, a good Northwesterner, freedom to differ is not limited to things that do not matter much. That would be a mere shadow of freedom. The test of its substance is the right to differ as to things that touch the heart of the existing order. Thus far, in the current events, we have not witnessed any significant efforts to limit expression or association. The President's request that the television networks use discretion in broadcasting taped interviews with the terrorist groups, I don't think violates any constitutional principles. The networks are free to do as they choose, but I think it takes a step in the direction and evidences the temptation the government has to try to limit the dissemination of information. Finally, permit me a few observations on the relationship between a concern for civil liberties of Americans and the prosecution of a war on terrorism. When President Bush stated that the events of September 11 constituted acts of war, international law experts, including a couple on my faculty, were quick to caution that the use of the term war implicated international law in a way the President may not have intended. It's since clear to me that the President chose his words carefully and with full understanding of their implication. The rules of war are very different from the rules of civil society, particularly the rules of civil society which govern the United States. While I would urge that all people, regardless of nationality, religion, or ethnicity, are entitled to our respect and due consideration as human beings, I would also argue that during war, we owe our enemies none of the due process we give our citizens. There are probably good political and diplomatic reasons to provide the world with our evidence against Osama bin Laden, but there are no legal reasons to feel constrained by our own constitutional standards in our war on terrorism. The Taliban has demanded to see our evidence, notwithstanding that it requires none of itself when it suppresses the freedoms of its own citizens. The administration has properly ignored those demands. Surely there is little more frustrating to the families of those lost on September 11th than to see admitted terrorists interviewed on television. We know who they are. Someone knows where they are. We knew these things before September 11th, yet over 6,000 people died in what bin Laden celebrates as a great victory. Before responding, we should hold ourselves to the standards we apply. Should we hold ourselves to the standards we apply in criminal proceedings in our own courts? Absolutely not. There will be collateral impacts, and that is tragic for the innocent people affected. But there is no war in which innocent people have not suffered. The only justification for that suffering is the greater cause, which in our case is human freedom. If freedom is our cause, we must take every precaution in protecting the freedoms of Americans. 2 centuries ago, Thomas Jefferson wrote these words with remarkable relevance to our current situation. Quote, "We must choose between freedom and fear. We cannot have both. If the citizens of the United States persist in being afraid, the real rulers of this country will be fanatics, fired with a zeal to save grown men from objectionable ideas by putting them under the care of official nursemaids. Jefferson's solution was an informed public, which we will have only if we respect our constitutional protections, even or especially in the face of fear." But for those who may think Jefferson a bit antiquated for our modern world of terrorism by high technology, consider the words of Andrew Sullivan in last Sunday's New York Times Magazine. Sullivan argues that while this is not a religious war for the United States, it is for Osama bin Laden and his followers. Just as religious zealotry can lead to horrific results, as we have seen in New York and Washington, so too can patriotic fundamentalism in the face of fear. Sullivan says, quote, "The security against an American Taliban is therefore relatively simple. It's the Constitution." Thank you.
Dean, excellent, excellent. You know, now, I have a hard time disagreeing with much of that, and I'm supposed to be your conservative, hard-nosed prosecutor. Let me tell you, I'm really happy to be here and have this opportunity to talk to you and spend this time with you this afternoon. It's good to see old friends, make new friends. I saw one of my racquetball friends in the back corner who slipped in there, someone I'm used to seeing in the shower room, not at a luncheon table. And Dean, yes, I do employ some of your students, your graduates, but I exploit your students, and you recall that. And those of you who have been students, student interns are made for exploitation and education. We have matured a lot in the last several centuries, and I think that's important to remember. And I think you just heard a scroll through some of the history that we've done. We've seen a lot of differences. We've changed. Things have changed since September 11th. All of you know where you were on September 11th. I mean, that's a day we'll remember. You were in the shower. You were eating breakfast. You were brushing your teeth. You were already at work. You're in your car. You're listening to NPR. You were doing something when you heard out here on the West Coast what was going on. Others of you, some of you here, have other days that you remember. Some of you, I suspect, remember Pearl Harbor. Some of you remember when Kennedy was shot. And no, not the senator, the president. But some of you remember these things. And these are all days that have changed the way we do business, the way we are, the way we conduct our business. And I'd like to point something out. Some of you heard James Q. Wilson when he was in town. He wrote an op-ed piece in the LA Times, and let me quote it. This was recently, last week. "Some people fear that the war against terrorism will mean an unacceptable loss in American freedoms. No doubt that could happen. But so far, it hasn't, and there is little evidence that it is about to." And I think that's important to remember about this country. We have grown, we have matured, we are not going to repeat the same mistakes that we committed in the past. You know, if we go back through history, we talked about John Adams. We're all reading right now that wonderful new book about Adams. But the Sedition Act, you know, trashing the First Amendment. You know, what happens if you talk against the government? That was John Adams. He was a protector and a proponent of the Constitution. You know, Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War, he suspended habeas corpus. I mean, think of the things that have happened. Attorney General John Ashcroft hasn't asked for any of these powers. He hasn't whipped up scare tactics against Muslims. He hasn't, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt did, rounded up people of Japanese descent or people of Arab descent or Muslim. We haven't opened internment camps, and we're not about to. We haven't done the things that happened during Watergate. We haven't done things that Senator Joseph McCarthy did during his Red Scare, calling everyone a communist and opening up hearings. We haven't done that. The worst we've done with the media is call the network and say, hey, pay attention to what you're putting on from bin Laden. Times of war and strife make us rethink where we're going. And can we balance our freedoms with our civil liberties and our rights of privacy? You bet we can. Should we openly debate and discuss this? Yes, we ought to. That's why I think it's wonderful that you are here this afternoon. You're going to talk about this. Hopefully something that your two speakers have said are going to make you on your drive home or your walk back to work or over a cup of coffee or a soda tonight say, God, is that really right? We're going to think about that. We're going to have open dialogue. And that's how we've matured. We are going to think. And what is the administration asking for? Now remember, the administration are R's, and I suspect there are some of you like me, there are D's that are in this audience, okay? Monroe? Yes. All right, what's our goal? Prevent more terrorism. I mean, that's a simple goal. Bring terrorists to justice. How are we going to do that and stay within the confines of our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our rights to privacy? It's important. We don't have a decent definition of terrorism. I mean, is that so hard? We don't. We need to work on it. We have tougher laws dealing with organized crime, the mafia, and high-level drug kingpin traffickers than we do with terrorism. We haven't made it a national priority. We haven't had that open debate. We've been dithering about it. Oklahoma City, 1996. We've debated it. There have been bills in and bills out, and we've done things about it. But we haven't made that a national priority. We've got to take a look at it. We can treat terrorism like we do the RICO law. And some of you will clutch your heart and say the RICO law, it hasn't been abused. There were the fear that it would be abused, but it hasn't, and it's been a good tool. And it's been tested in the courts, in the judicial system, and in the legislative system. We've got to take a look at that. Prosecutorial review, jury review, judicial review, and legislative review. These are all reviews that we have for changes in the law. Technology has overtaken us. My gosh, how many of you in the last day or so have made a cell phone call? Do you know when we did our wiretap laws? Rotary telephones. Rotary telephones. Internet? Holy cow, no. Voicemail box? How do you get into a voicemail box? We are operating with laws that were crafted properly at the time, and we've tortured and twisted and tried to expand them. But some of the proposals that are out there to clean up these laws are not new. They are not predicated on September 11th. September 11th has made us think about these things. But think about that. Well, rotary telephones, sure. I mean, that's how you tap a phone. Well, what do you do about internet? What do you do about trap and trace? Trap and trace is merely finding out where phone calls originate from and where they go, not the content. We need to deal with that. We need to be very upfront in a fast-moving investigation, one where we have an increasingly mobile society with people going from state to state to state to city to city to city, from Boston to Miami to Chicago to New York and back and out to the West Coast, and with throwaway cell phones. Make a call, throw it away, and use a different one. We need to have the ability for what they call roving wiretap. Not one for every phone. And believe me, I've worked through these cell phone things where you have to get one for every damn phone. And that is a pain. But we need to upgrade our laws. And we need to have the upgrading done in public, much as it's done now in the National Congress, with open debate. And you have to have people from the Justice Administration laying out some of these problems. We need to be able to track the money. Now, how many times, we had that movie, Show Me the Money. And how many times have you said, if you really want to know where a person's priorities are, what they're doing, is track the money. We have got to be able to have enhanced subpoena power for bank records. We've got to be able to track the money. These things aren't cheap. Terrorism isn't cheap to finance. Money flows, and it flits in nanoseconds from offshore banks back and forth, back and forth. We have got to, in the law enforcement community, be able to get those records, find out where those transactions are going. How do we do it? We have to upgrade our laws. And that is what the two bills that the two things you have that are going through right now, the national legislature. The Terrorism Act of 2001, and the other one, I don't know where they get these names, it's the USA Act of 2001. That's a compromise one. It's American Strengthening or Unity Act. But we've got to get those things together. And these are some of the problems that law enforcement faces. We need to talk about leaks. You know, you worry about, does this public debate, will that lend to leaks, to notices in the press? Probably. There needs to be a certain amount of that. But no one's asking anyone to clamp down. In fact, you saw President Bush chastise the Congress, his own Congress, some of his own party members, for leaks coming out of there on what's going on. But these are issues that need to be dealt with. The technology is probably one of the foremost ones we have. And these are not new proposals. Keep in mind that we've had Columbine, we've had Oklahoma City. These proposals, some of you think are draconian. Some of you think, my God, they're going to tap my phone. It's only done after a showing before a magistrate. Do you think we're going to get your Nordstrom account? My gosh, Nordstrom's knows more about you, the profile, what color socks you buy, how much you buy, when you buy them, and when you pay your bill than the federal government does. And isn't that silly? A private corporation can do things that the federal government can't. We need to do this. New technologies, cameras, surveillance cameras, offensive, isn't it? You walk in here, do you think you're under surveillance? Great Britain, in the early 1990s, had 79 surveillance cameras. Last count, they had 2.5 million surveillance cameras. You walk, you're observed. You're outside, you're observed. Some of the cities around here, Tampa Bay, Tampa, Florida. Remember the Super Bowl, the big flap between civil libertarians' right of privacy and the people who are running the Super Bowl? They had the Face It, where they fed in some terrorist computer images, and then they had all the cameras planted around. You're going to see more of that. And how are we going to deal with that? Surveillance cameras are in use in more and more public places. What's our right of privacy? What's your right of privacy? What are you willing to give up? You know, one article expressed this. I was doing some reading, and I sit on an intelligence committee of another life, and I found this. The capability of technology to allow the reproduction of images or sounds without the participation or consent of the individual and the power of the person capturing the image to reproduce and distribute to society at large would result in privacy violations that suppress legal protections. It sounds awesome, doesn't it? You know when that was written? It was written by Louis Brandeis in 1890, an article. And you know what he was talking about? Law enforcement using the camera, the snapshot. Now, we've come a long ways, but these issues are still the same. How do we balance privacy, public safety? How do we fit it in with our Constitution, our Bill of Rights? Other technologies that we're getting, face recognition. Some of the studies tell us that face recognition will get you 2/3 of the time. Well, one study I read said 1/3 of the time. Well, is that better? Is that worse? Should we use it? It's still imperfect, but we better see it. We better experiment with it. And we better get adequate laws. And the only way we're going to get adequate laws with good protections is open public debate and dialogue like this. People saying no, never, and people saying yes, always. And somehow we're going to get together. That's what's going on right now in the Congress. If you read the Morning Oregonian, and Fred Stickle will love it, but Meeker and Dr. Pamplin won't when I quote the Oregonian. But if you look on, I think it's page 18 or 19, it'll tell you, yeah, you're a stockholder in one of them, aren't you, Francis? But right now, they're debating and they're compromising, as we speak, some of these crucial issues. And that's what we want. We want the men and women we send to the national legislature. We want them to get the best advice. And we want them to work out the solutions for us. But national ID cards, Europe, Brazil, a lot of countries have them. A poll conducted recently, actually it was right after, 2 days after the September 11th by Pew, it's 70% of the people said, yes, national ID cards, sign me up. It's a good idea, we need it. Show me your papers. Well, 3 weeks later, the New York Times ran it, and it slipped down to 56%. And the same week, they did one with 54%, the CNN poll. But you're going to get more issues like this. Public health, we ought to pay attention. What about germ warfare? What about the scares that we're having right now? And what about the protection? And we've all fought, and we know there are darn good policy reasons to keep medical records private. But there has to be a way that we can access on a nationwide basis, under precautions. We have to be able to access those. What about on a local level? Well, my time, I'll get jerked in a minute, Susan, I'll be quick. We've got some local issues here. Some of you participated in the debate at City Council. Should local law enforcement participate in an FBI terrorism task force? Boy, I tell you, I think that's a no-brainer, quite frankly. Yes, we ought to. Yes, we ought to, and that opinion was way before September 11th. We need to have local people in there. With local people, we get a level of local oversight and local participation and local control, and we want that. I don't want everything dictated from Washington. I'm a big proponent of local participation. But participation, yes. Now, you legal scholars out here, the Gaddy decision. Do you know that I cannot advise an undercover operation in this state without putting in danger getting my ticket punched by the Bar Association? I mean, that's crazy. The FBI will tell you they've shut down undercover operations. Now, if I ask NOHAD to go out and be a spy for me, he's not going to say he's the dean at Portland State. He's got to say he's someone else. And if I advise him as a lawyer, you're going to punch my ticket. We've been through the Bar Association twice, the House of Delegates. We've been to the legislature, and we've got it cleaned up in the legislature, the House of Delegates, and now we're trying to get that in a position where the Supreme Court will accept it. But these are issues. These are issues that need open debate. There are good reasons. If you want to do an undercover operation on housing, you can't do it. Legal aid is in the same predicament I am. Now, some of you who represent the landlords will say, well, that's good. But that really isn't. You want lawyers to be advising about covert operations. Well, I hope I piqued your interest and pointed out some of the problems. I think a lot happens in the public sector, and I congratulate all of you for spending your time and thinking about this. Our Bill of Rights are sacred. Our Constitution, our rights of privacy, they're very, very important. Many people have spoken, and I think we have matured as a society. The list that the dean and I both gave you of different acts, horror stories that have gone down, they haven't happened. And a lot of people feared, and probably rightly so. We all feared for an overreaction. But open dialogue, we need to move fast. We can't dither forever. As I said, some of these issues have been around for at least 5 or 6 years, and certainly since Oklahoma, some of these terrorism bills. We need to reach closure on them. And we also probably need to sunset them. I have no problem with sunsetting, because sunsetting brings review, justification. We can tinker, we can upgrade, we can say we don't need it, we can say it's been abused frequently, and we can get rid of it. So I think we're going to get something out of our national conference, our Congress, and I think that's important. So I think it's important that the House and Senate are getting together. We probably within the next week or 10 days will get a conference committee bill that is going to address a lot of these issues. But keep in mind, they deserve an open, clear, honest discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Huffman and District Attorney Schrunk. It has been said before in this country that the only sure bulwark of continuing liberty is a government strong enough to protect the interests of the people and a people strong enough and well enough informed to maintain its sovereign control over its government. Franklin Roosevelt in 1938. In this statement is the creed that in America it is the people who must have the greater balance of power when compared to that of the government. But with the advent of surveillance and defense technology that's necessary to catch today's enemies, one wonders whether or not there really can be a people strong enough and well enough informed in order to maintain control over its government. Is the notion of a government of, by, and for the people now simply an archaic and forgotten sentiment?
I don't think so. I certainly hope not. But I think, to really reiterate a point I've already made, that the way in which popular sovereignty has worked effectively in our country throughout our history, I believe, is intimately tied to the structure of the government that we have. I emphasized earlier the importance of the federal system, and I am a firm believer in that. If there's anything about the current proposals in Congress that cause me any worry, it's really proposals for greater centralization. And those are very natural. It's instinctual to think, let's bring more power to the center so that we can get these problems solved. But when you bring power to the center, you move it farther from the people. So to me, the most critical aspect of our Constitution is not the Bill of Rights. It is the federal structure and the separation of powers within both our national and state governments. And that is what I believe makes popular sovereignty effective in this country.
I'd second that, but I'd also point out that we've elected some very bright men and women over the years, particularly one of them from Oregon, my hero, Wayne Morris, who has not always agreed with popular causes. And I think what we need to respect is a person's right to disagree. And we also, in times of crisis like this, because someone is taking what might be an unpopular tact in a debate, we've got to take a step back and not demonize those men and women. And you read the popular press, and you'll see them being demonized in editorial comment, in the press, or in columnist paper. But I think we are strong enough. I think as a people, that's something that is in our culture. We need to respect the right to disagree.
Thank you. Andrea Myers, City Club member, and I'm the Legislative Director for the ACLU of Oregon. Mr. Schrunk, you just gave a very passionate but disturbing support of Attorney General Ashcroft's proposals. I simply want to point out that the Joint Terrorism Task Force that was recently voted on by the City Council of Portland was not a no-brainer to either the ACLU, the Japanese American Citizens League, the National Organization for Women, the Sierra Club, the League of Women Voters, or the Quakers, just to name a few, all of who testified to some very profound concerns about that agreement, namely, right. So I just want to go on record. But actually, Dean Huffman, I'm more concerned about what you testified to, or you spoke to. You spoke to approving the expansion of the Foreign Investigative Security Act because it was criminal investigations. When you spoke of wiretaps, you said it's nothing more than accommodating cell phones. As to internet use, you said people don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Racial profiling is appropriate, and as to immigration, you're supporting or considering the national ID card. Is there anything specifically about the proposals that are before Congress right now that you do oppose? And can you please identify those for us? Thank you.
Well, let me be clear on racial profiling. I didn't say I embrace it. I said it's inevitable. It's part of what police work requires. There's no other way to pursue suspects for whom you don't have a specific identification. It will be some characteristics that they have. So at least we have to be specific about what kind of profiling we disapprove of, and I don't believe I said that I was in favor of racial profiling. As I indicated by my immediately previous comment, the thing that concerns me most about the package of proposals is to the extent that it is a centralizing feature, that it puts those powers in the federal hands without local control. To the extent it does that, I'm very concerned about it.
If I might respond to my no-brainer comment, it was a no-brainer for me. Expressing concerns is far different than opposition, in my opinion. Obviously, I have concerns, but I think we ought to go ahead with it. As I have concerns about some of the things that I spoke of today, but I think we ought to go ahead of it. And I certainly don't denigrate anybody who testified in opposition, because I think people testifying in opposition and expressing those concerns, and some of my friends testified and have spoken to me about that, I think it only makes for a better system, a better ordinance, in this case at City Council, and more people alert in the participation.
Good afternoon, Erwin Mandel, City Club member. There's an old quote, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. I'd like you to comment on a suggestion I have, perhaps for modification. Eternal vigilance, including vigilance against the intrusions of government, is the price of liberty.
Well, I agree with that, Doc. You know, I think we need to be on guard. You know, I happen to work for the government right now, and I think we need to be on guard against that. And that's why I'm in favor. I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. I'm here to solve your problems. I'm here to take charge. I think that ought to be the red flag. But it doesn't mean that they're wrong. But vigilance, I would tend to agree with you.
I would just add, I think that in somewhat of a response to the earlier question as well, that I think Mike suggested in his comments that none of these terrible things that were anticipated have happened, and I quite agree with him, but I would emphasize the importance of not believing that those things can't happen in this country. They can, and they have in the past, and so I think I don't disagree with most of what's been proposed by the administration, but I do suggest that we should be wary of those kinds of things being expanded and not assume that we are immune, as Frankfurter suggested.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. Today is October 12. In case we have forgotten, it's Columbus Day. It's the anniversary of when this country was discovered by Columbus, unless you believe that Erickson did it earlier. In any event, my question is, shouldn't we be more careful and discriminating about entry and immigration into the country? It seems that after World War II, in the 50s and 60s, there has been a substantial broadening of the right to entry and immigration. And I'm an immigrant, came here in '53.
Well, as I said earlier, I certainly think we should be very discriminating about it. And my own ad hoc experience with the INS is that it's erratic. I mentioned my Greek son-in-law. It took us 2 years to get a young man who I consider upstanding and who was married to my daughter into this country. At the same time, there are people who enter this country with great ease, including some of those involved in the September 11th events, who obviously should not have been admitted to this country. So I think there's a lot of work to be done by our immigration authorities in knowing what to be discriminating about in the admission of people to this country.
I agree, and I think you should pay attention to the debates. You know, we really have had two friendly borders to our north and south, and there's literally been very few people stopped. But I think now you're going to see particularly our Canadian neighbors, and there's discussion going on in Congress as we speak, again, about tightening the northern borders. So, yes, I agree, we need to pay attention.
My name is Fred Rosenbaum. I'm a member of the City Club. I want to go on to a basic question. Senator Hart, I think it was 10 or 11 years ago, formed a committee in the Senate that dealt with parts of terrorism. 3 years ago, the Joint Chiefs of Staff at a meeting in Washington, D.C., made a statement saying, we don't see any war on the horizon, but we see terrorism. Booklets were put out, publications were put out, special teams were designed to fight weapons of mass destruction. California has these teams. Washington has these teams. We're still running around today, a month after this whole horrible mess happened, and we're not ready 1 inch. You, Mr. Schrunk, having been in the military, and I don't know about you, Mr. Huffman, what the hell is going on here?
I agree. It's not like if we didn't have early warning. There have been 3 national commissions, Fred only mentioned one of them, that recognized and that pointed out that terrorism was the most immediate threat to us from our borders.